Mrs. Schultz, please tell us a little about your connection and interest in LaPorte County and Patton Cemetery.
Well, my interest in LaPorte County probably started the day I was born, because I grew up in a family that had a great deal of interest in the county. My maternal side of my family came to LaPorte a couple years after LaPorte County became a county in 1832. And it just seemed like my house has always been a museum of personal things, and my parents were always involved in historical things. My father always saw to it that we went to every historical event that occurred in the county that he could possibly get us to. And so it just seems like it's been a natural thing for me to have an interest and continued interest in the county. And when the opportunity came along for me to become county historian, I was very pleased that the state of Indiana chose me. And the Indiana Historical Bureau and the Indiana Historical Society selected me to be county historian, and I've been now for about 22 years. And my interest in Patton Cemetery, I'm not entirely interested in just Patton Cemetery. I'm interested in every cemetery we have in the county. And just for the record, I'm president of the Pine Lake Cemetery Association, have been for a number of years. And I'm interested basically in the cemeteries because they are the resting place of many of the people who made us what we are today. And I've researched a considerable amount of the people who are buried in our cemeteries, and more cemeteries than some. Door Village I have had a particular interest in because I do a living cemetery tour there. And of course Pine Lake has been one of my prime interests. I have family buried both in Pine Lake and Patton, and also in Greenwood and Michigan City. So my interest in cemeteries is a little bit more extensive than most people's. If they have burials, it's basically in one cemetery, not just three of them. But there's a lot of history involved in our cemeteries. If anyone wants to research individuals there, that's the way to go to find out more about what we're about in LaPorte County. Because without the people that are buried there, we wouldn't exist here. And of course, at Patton Cemetery, the early part of Patton is Walker Cemetery, which is over on the corner of
Rumley and Clement, which we discussed just a little bit ago.
And their burial markers are there, and John Walker was one of the founding fathers of LaPorte. So that cemetery initially, of course, is an important part of our history. And later on, Davidson Patton took the cemetery over when it was in disrepair and built it up and brought it to today. But now, of course, it's kind of fallen a little bit in disrepair today. And a lot of things have to do with finances.
But it's interesting to me that Davidson Patton settled in LaPorte just within a few years after your own family settled here in the 1830s.
After who settled?
After your family settled here. Yes, within a few years of your family settling here was when.
Well, that was a time when a lot of people were moving west.
Yes.
And land was cheap, $1.50 an acre.
Wow.
And if people had a little bit of money, well, they came west to invest. That's
Sure.
basically what a lot of people, like the founding fathers of LaPorte, were really. I don't like to make it sound like they were people who were trying to take advantage of others, but a lot of them were land speculators. They had
Sure.
some money, and they could purchase land and then later sell it for a little bit more and make some money off of it.
Sure.
And that's what a lot of land speculators did, and why they came west and purchased thousands of acres. And as a result of that, of course, the West moved further west than us. A lot of people who came to LaPorte didn't remain here. Some of their family did, but a lot of it didn't. They continued to move west because there again, the land was opening up in the west where they could maybe make a fortune. Yes. And so people this was just a stopping off point. But we started with what we call LaPorte City Cemetery. I don't know if you're familiar with that.
No, I'm not.
The old city cemetery was our initial cemetery. It was located on Lake Street, about where Tea Garden Street would cross the railroad track. And it became in such disrepair. It basically was a a graveyard and not a cemetery. Lots weren't sold. People just kind of buried at will.
Yes.
And it became in pretty bad shape. And when Patton and Pine Lake cemeteries came into existence, people who had loved ones buried in the Old City Cemetery were given the opportunity of moving their loved ones to these cemeteries if they chose to do so, and many of them did. But there were also a lot of people still left in the Old City Cemetery. And in 1893, the county commissioners decided that they had to close that cemetery because it just was no longer a place for people to be buried. So at that time, then Pine Lake Cemetery offered a piece of ground in their cemetery where they could move all of the bodies that were remaining in the Old City Cemetery. And the county then did move what they figure about 499 bodies are moved from the Old City Cemetery and in what we call the old enclosure in Pine Lake Cemetery. But many who have been moved earlier are buried out within the regular burial grounds in both Patton and Pine Lake Cemetery. And those were the basic two cemeteries where the Old City Cemetery was moved. So that, and a lot of those people were, well, some were transients, we figure, because we have no record of who they were. They may have been people who, as I said, moving west. And
yes, that's right.
Some died and were buried here in the Old City Cemetery, and then families moved on west.
Yes.
But many were people who remained here. Some of my family was buried in the Old City Cemetery and are now in the old enclosure at Pine Lake. So it's all part of history.
Yes, I wasn't familiar with all of that, but I know that you have quite a compilation that you have brought together in the binders in front of you there, that you have taken quite a few pictures and just have a lot of records.
Oh yes, this is all about Patton. I have, what I try to do and what I've tried over the years to do is gather for my own purposes the history of all of our cemeteries in the county. From the very first deed where the property was made a cemetery, and then some of the things that have happened to our cemeteries throughout the years. There's a little bit of history about the cemeteries themselves as well as the people within them. And of course, Patton is no different. As I said earlier, it started out just a big family cemetery, Walker Cemetery, and expanded. Now it's become Patton Cemetery. And it's had its ups and downs, as many cemeteries have.